Sorry. Dr. Garcia has been a research assistant for Alliance for Pros based at Florida State University, and she has facilitated numerous workshops pertaining to race, diversity, and equity issues. She is also currently engaged in research regarding policy in higher education and considers herself a critical race feminist practitioner slash scholar. She has won an early career award from Aspire in 2016 and an Inclusive Excellence Award from the University of Denver in 2019. Her dissertation is entitled A Policy Discourse Analysis of Discipline Transcript Notation in Cases of Sexual Assault on College Campuses. So if we could give thumbs up again, claps, celebration emojis to welcome Dr. Garcia with us today, and I'm gonna pass it over.
Thank you so much. That was so kind. I never know how to react when I hear my bio, so thank you. Hello, everyone. Thanks for letting me join your meeting today. I'm super excited. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I have a PowerPoint and we can get started. I'm super excited to be able to go through some policy stuff. We're gonna actually do some policy analysis today as a group, which is gonna be super fun. So I hope you're excited for that. And I'm gonna show you one method that we can analyze policy. So excited to be in the room, excited to share this experience with all of you, and we'll go ahead and get started. So let me share my screen. Let's see here. Oh, sorry, you're gonna hear my dog. There we go. It's okay, Chewbacca. It's okay, honey. All right. Oh my goodness. Chewy, it's okay. Come here. It's okay. Come here. It's okay. Okay. So can everyone see my screen? Yeah?
Yep, we can see it.
Yes.
I'm gonna see, give me 1 second because I don't want him to keep barking. Sorry about that. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So this is what we're going to be working on today. Leveraging and pushing for critical perspectives on policy analysis. So I'm super excited again to be with and for the CoCEAL community. Yeah. All right. Let's go to the next. All right, so we're going to talk. I always like to have an agenda just so that you're all aware of where we're going. So first I want to start with a little pause for gratitude. And then we're going to be talking about grounding in just some expectations that we can all hold each other accountable to. We're going to review the learning outcomes that I presented to the executive board and making sure that to hold me accountable that you're learning exactly what I had proposed that you would learn. We're going to have a facilitated community reflection. I really don't like giving solid lectures. I feel like that's embedded in a very much white supremacy model of learning. And so since we're in community today, and hopefully some of you had the opportunity to read the reading, we're going to go ahead and have a facilitated reflection conversation about that reading and about some of the tenets that we're going to practice today. Then you're all going to get into some small groups and actually practice some policy analysis. So yay, exciting. And then we're going to have a large group reflection at the end of how that went. and then any questions, comments, and then I actually have some books that we're going to do a spinny wheel drawing, and you're going to all, whoever wins, I have 3 books to give away. I'll make sure to be sending those to you. So hopefully that'll be fun. The teacher and me, I was a K through 12 special ed teacher, so that always is a part of who I am and what I do and how I present. So yay, free books. Okay, so I first want to start off, I got an email this morning from the Colorado State Fair. And if any of you don't know, the Colorado State Fair is going to be up and running full capacity this summer. I'm from Pueblo, Colorado, and so that's like a big deal for us, and that's a huge revenue source for Pueblo. I heard Nally is going to be in concert, which is like super exciting. It brings back my high school days. But also they have a really great Fiesta Queen pageant that they host every year. And actually in 2007, I was on the Fiesta Queen court, which is pretty funny. And one of my many talents, I'd like to think, was telling tales from our community and our culture. And so I used to travel, we used to travel and do our talents in all these church festivals through the summer. And I would tell stories that were passed on from our ancestors, our community, to little children in the crowd so that they could keep that with them and have those stories with them. So one of them I used to tell was the day it snowed tortillas. And I'm not sure if any of you heard that tale before. I love that tale. I found this cute little picture online that was so cute, which basically has the tortillas snowing. And so I thought it was super cute. But it's a tale from Spanish New Mexico. And basically in a nutshell, 2 things emerged from this tale. The family is extremely important. We know that. And that's definitely a part of a lot of who we are and what we think about. But then also that Latinx women have been saving their families since the beginning of time. So basically the mother, the woman, the wife in this tale comes up with a way to save her husband from getting in trouble. And so they pretend that it's raining and snowing tortillas. So she stays up all night making all of these tortillas and pretends that it's raining, snowing tortillas. And so she comes up with this brilliant plan, per usual, to save her family. And so as a pause for gratitude, I have a special guest with me today. And it's actually my mother who's in the crowd, who is this powerful leader at Pikes Peak Community College. And so I wanted to pause because I don't publicly get to thank her enough for everything that she's contributed to my life, being the woman that constantly saves our family and saves me. So big shout out to Sylvia Garcia from Pikes Peak Community College. And thanks for making also great tortillas all the time for my life. So love you, Mom. Thank you for being here and supporting me. And thank you for all that you do for students across Colorado. All right. Now we're going to do some grounding in. I've heard that you did a little bit of grounding in before you started your meeting, which is wonderful. I think that I also just want to, make sure that we're all on the same page when we're having these discussions. We're going to be challenging our own selves. We're going to be challenging systems. And sometimes that's hard. That's hard work. And so just wanting to make sure that we're all kind of coming in and holding each other accountable and can be at the same place while we're having these discussions. So if I could have some folks, if you can all see this, if I could have some folks maybe take turns reading out loud some of these, and you can just pick whatever box you want to read from. But can I have a first volunteer to get us started?
I'll do it. Yes, this is Joel. Okay, so I'll read the first one. Speak from personal experience. Use I statements to share thoughts and feelings. You cannot speak for your group.
Wonderful, thank you.
I can go next. Listen respectfully, notice group dynamics, share airtime, and encourage others to participate.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks, Manny.
Be open to new perspectives.
Yeah, thank you. Let's be open today.
Take risks.
Yeah, right. That's how we're going to learn.
I can go next. Respect and maintain privacy. What's shared here stays here.
Yeah, just for transparency, thank you, Mary. We're recording now for the lecture part, but the rest of this will not be recorded so that we can have some real solid conversation about some policies and feelings that maybe come out of that. So just for transparency, no one else will hear your feelings or emotions. And I hope we can all respect that with each other, that we take the lessons learned here today, but not necessarily who they came from and what that means. So thank you.
Expect, accept, no resolution.
Yeah, that's what's so hard, right? That today we're just going to be discussing and scratching the surface, but there actually may be no resolution that we come up with today. And so, yeah, I think we have to all sit in that and how sometimes that feels really uncomfortable. Thank you.
I can go. Multiple realities exist.
Yeah, two things can be true at the same time. There's multiple realities that exist that are also true. Yeah, thank you.
Graciously receive call-ins.
Yeah, so if our brothers and sisters are sharing their experience and maybe challenging our notions that potentially are based in privilege, how can we graciously call that in and listen and be grateful for them caring enough about us to want to share that knowledge with us? Yeah, thanks.
We don't know all there is to know.
Exactly, we don't. Even as someone that has studied this, I definitely don't know that there all is to know. And I was rereading the article that I sent out and I was like, I still am learning and thinking about things that I learned from this article. And I've read this article a million times, but I thought it was so good. So yes, we're not experts. We're all still learning and we don't know everything. Thank you. Couple more.
Just because you are doesn't mean that you understand.
Exactly. I come from a lot of privileged experiences. And so just because I identify as Indigenous and Chicana doesn't mean that I understand all of the experiences of Indigenous and Chicana women.
Conflict and discomfort are often part of growth.
Yeah, they are. I've been working out every single morning at a new workout, and my goodness, I am so sore. And that discomfort is building muscle, and that's part of growth. And so we sometimes have to sit in that. Yeah, thanks. Last one.
Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Yeah. So if we ask a question, we're asking questions to try to understand where someone's coming from. Instead of sometimes we like to think, well, we're asking questions so that we can prove our point later. Let's try to see if we can do this part of where we seek to understand first. Yeah. Cool. Can we all agree upon these today as we're entering this space together? Can I get maybe a thumbs up or emoji? Awesome. Cool. Great, thank you. All right. So here's some of our learning outcomes for today. So we're going to learn a little bit about discourse analysis. You actually, if anyone was able to read the pre-reading, you were able to learn a specific kind of discourse analysis, genealogical, Foucauldian genealogical discourse analysis, which is a mouthful. And so that is the type of a larger discourse analysis. There are many different types and kinds and ways and methods. This is only one. And it's also has, I guess, a partner, a connection to critical policy analysis. And so you're going to learn about critical studies and post-structural studies and what that means and how that plays a role in policy discourse analysis. So then you're going to also understand some, let's see here, let me move this, our faces, ways in which inequities and white supremacy show up in policy creation and implementation. And that's basically what Carabine was saying, or the 11 steps in Carabine's method of how can we look at policies to start showing that there's inequities within these policies and that the implementation of these policies have some pretty problematic effects. And so we look through that through power. And so we're really studying power and the ramifications of power, who has it, who doesn't, and what does that mean? You'll also always be checking your own preconceived notions of equity, liberation, and justice. So there's no way you can do this work without challenging your own biases, your own experiences, the ways in which you see the world. And so that will continue to happen today as you learn a new method in a way that you're analyzing policies. And then you're actually get to analyze a policy. You get to actually practice using the 11 steps that Carabine talked about in their writings. And then the last one is hopefully that you'll leave the presentation. My main goal is with a novice level of confidence in your ability to analyze and challenge policies, which are power. And so I definitely want to make sure that you're leaving with some type of empowerment of understanding the creation of policies, and then how you can challenge those policies and the ways in which we read or see policies. So that's my goal. I'm still developing that skill. And so again, there's not like a master, like, you know, if you do so many things, you hit a master level. This is a work in progress, but I'm really excited to be a part of your journey as we start. All right. So one of the first things that we're going to talk about, so we're going to go into this mini lecture like I talked about before, but really I want this to be an opportunity for folks that read the article, and it's okay if you didn't. I'll still make sure to go over some points. But if you read the article, I would love to hear some of your thoughts or feelings about what you read. So the article was called Foucauldian Genealogical Discourse Analysis, which again is a mouthful. I'm like, what does that even mean? And it was by Jean Carabine, and I actually used this method for my dissertation in analyzing some state and federal policies around campus sexual assault mandatory transcription policies. And so I use these 11 steps to actually analyze those policies. So how it kind of all goes together is you kind of see critical policy analysis, and we're going to actually go over what that means, because some people are like, what does critical mean? And a lot of times folks think that means negative, like, oh, you're being so critical. But we're actually going to go over what the term critical actually means. And it basically means that, sure, it can mean that you're being more critical in a negative way, but it basically means that you're being thoughtful as to power structures, as to who's in the room, as to who's being excluded and included. And so it's another term to say that you're being really thoughtful when it comes to more social justice tenets of anything. And so when I claim myself as being a critical feminist scholar, I like to think that I am thinking really strategically and hard and taking a good look at power structures and who's in the room and who has power and who does not. So when we think of critical policy analysis, a typical policy analysis would be, okay, is this policy working? Is this policy doing what it was set out to do? But critical policy analysis asks the harder, deeper questions of, okay, is this policy working for underrepresented people? Is this policy working for minoritized low-income people? And so it digs deeper and really advocates and highlights and empowers communities that are often forgotten about in the regular, if you will, policy analysis. And so that's why it's important that when you do say that you're doing policy analysis, that you do say, hey, I'm doing critical policy analysis. I know whose side I'm on. I know what I'm looking for. And so I have here on one side, you see the critical policy analysis. And so again, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. There's a lot of different methods that you can look at things. You can look at the amount of money spent on a certain policy. You can look at who's having to implement the policy, which oftentimes is not in actual policies. They make policies pretty broad, right? And so there's a lot of different ways that you can look at critical policy analysis that are not necessarily the 11 steps that we're doing. It could include the 11 steps, but it's not. We're looking at discourse, which is writings, words, nonverbal cues, things that have been printed. And so we're looking at all the ways that language states and reinforces power within a policy. And so that's a little bit different than just critical policy analysis. Critical policy analysis is much broader, if that makes sense. And then we have critical discourse analysis, which again takes a look at the words. It's critical, takes a look at the words in the analysis, but it may not necessarily mean that it's a policy. So you can do critical discourse analysis on anything and everything. I'm now trained in my brain that I look at, an Instagram post, and I'm doing critical discourse analysis of the words, of the language, and a lot of these things have microaggressions built into them. And so what are these notions or sayings through these prominent, ads? What messages are they delivering, and who's getting those messages? And so I think that that's fascinating. My undergrad was in speech pathology, so I studied linguistics, and I still have like a little attachment to that. But I think that that's super fascinating. So those all kind of play a role. And then you have Foucauldian genealogical discourse analysis, and I'm going to kind of break that out. We're going to talk about Foucault. We're going to talk a little bit about what Foucault meant for genealogical, because it's not the typical idea of history. And so I think that that's something that we want to definitely talk about. It's not, Foucault doesn't want us to think about what we have to get to all of the history and research all of the history to find out the why. And so, that was stated very clearly in this article. That's why I also picked this article, is it really shares that that's not the goal that Foucault had when they created this genealogical discourse analysis thought. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. Any questions about this? They all kind of fit together. They're kind of all different. There's a lot of different ways. So I wish I had more concrete, this is how you should do it, this is the best way to do it. But I think that's also the beauty of being a critical scholar, is that you don't want it to be one way, because one way doesn't fit for everyone. So any questions on this? This is, again, just a very cursory thought process of where this all fits. And I actually can't see the chat very well, so if I can have any friends, let me know if there's any questions in the chat. I'll make sure to pause. Thank you.
Yeah, we got you, Dr. Garcia. If something comes up, I might just interrupt and say like, hey, there's a question in the chat box. So yeah.
Yeah, fill them up. And other folks, feel free to also interrupt and say, hey, like I have a question, or that doesn't make sense, or like, what are you saying? Feel free to just like pop on in. This is for you all, and this is for us as a community. So I don't want to get wrapped up in that hierarchical nonsense of power, even in this little space. So thanks. Okay, so I'm going to put this the very simplest way, and I apologize to folks that actually study critical studies and post-structuralism as a way to they're methodologists. They actually do this. I want to apologize. I am so sorry that I'm making this so simple, because I know it's not this simple. But how I see the difference between critical studies, and we kind of already talked about this, and then post-structuralism, which I think I'm a little of both. Actually, I think I fall into both of those, is critical studies will take a look. And so we use a table. I always use a table. I decided to have a festive table, a little fun table. Critical studies really takes a look to see who's at the table. Who's at the table and who's not at the table. And then they really ask why. Why are certain people at the table? And then they also ask what's being discussed at the table, and who was invited to the table, and how did that invite even get announced, and who has the power to invite? Like they ask all these things, right, about the table. And the table is this like idea of like leadership and things, things being like, discovered or made, or decisions being made, right? That's what they say. Who's ever at the table? That's where decisions are being made. Now, post-structuralism will say, why the heck is there even a table? Why is there even this thing where people feel like they have to be invited to feel like they have power? Why is that even a thing? And so I consider myself a little bit of both. I really enjoy queer theory. I think that's like this like amazing theory that like totally resonates with the way that my mind thinks of like, yeah, I totally want to ask the question of like, who's at the table? Why are they at the table? Who's made the decision of who gets to be at the table? And I want to ask the question of why is there even a table? Like I want both. And so it's oftentimes really hard to decide, well, this is a critical, theory, and this is a post-structural theory. Like that's like, there's a lot of gray in between there. And so I wanted to share both of those with you because I'm having a hard time even depicting like what is exactly critical studies without sharing that it could overlap with post-structuralism as well. So post-structuralism is all about the structure, right? And it's all about why should that even be there? Why is that even important? Who made that important? Who decided there needed to be a table? Maybe we need to be sitting on the floor. Like all of these really cool things that you can really challenge larger structures that I think Foucault definitely thinks about when they're thinking about this type of analysis. So I wanted to share that basis. There's a lot of different other bases of theories where they come from, but when thinking about critical discourse analysis, it's definitely coming from the critical post-structural area. There's also a lot of different ones. If you ever want to study that, you could actually get like a doctorate in it. You could get a master's in it. If you get a doctorate in higher education, you will have to study this a little bit. And so, yeah, super excited about sharing a very simplistic view of my critical studies post-structuralism. So I wanted to open up a little bit about Foucault. And so I'm going to go ahead and see if I can do this. Let's see. I have a YouTube video that I pulled up. I'm going to try to move you all around here. Oh boy. Okay. Just going to do one. I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare. I think I have to do, and then I think I have to do it with the volume. Share sound. Okay, can you all see this? I turned on the closed caption as well. Let's see if you can all hear this.
Yep, we can see it.
Writing's not that easy,
Great.
but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct.
Okay, skip.
Power. It's an ambiguous concept. In physics, we talk about power as the transfer of energy, or the potential to transfer energy. The sun has enough power too, for example. And social and political power is thought of in a similar way. The power to stop someone doing something, the power of the police to stop a speeding car. But compared to predictable physical objects, the force of gravity on a rock or the waterfall to generate hydroelectric energy, the way people and institutions wield power upon other people, and how power has an effect on those people, is a difficult concept to understand. French philosopher Michel Foucault, whose thought I've introduced here, had a particularly influential theory of how power operated. It underpins almost all of Foucault's work, but it's also worth looking at in depth for another reason. It's the most frequent criticism of him, that his work is, cynically, all about power. This is true, but the cynicism is misdirected. Because although Foucault is interested in the power to, for example, stopping someone doing something, he is more interested in power in a more neutral sense, how power can be productive as well as oppressive, like the waterfall and the rock. To understand this, it's essential to understand how three Foucauldian concepts relate to one another: the subject, power, and knowledge. In the essay Why Study Power? The Question of the Subject, Foucault writes, "My objective has been to create a history of the different modes by which, in our culture, human beings are made subjects." What does he mean by subjects? He has a unique understanding of the subject, of how the human mind is constructed. He says it's become objectified, that is, that it's a subject and an object at the same time. Take the study of the speaking human, Foucault says. It's only in the 19th century that we begin to study human speech as an object, as a science, as something to be understood. We start to study grammar, then philology, linguistics. We start to categorize, measure, compare. The human becomes an object. It becomes written down, quantified, put in boxes, interpreted. Humans as a species become things to be studied themselves. But this objectification then becomes subjectification. This new information has power over us, encourages us to act in certain ways. It subjectifies us. In a very obvious sense, for example, we teach children in schools by the standards dictated by the history of linguistics, or economics based on a very limited and particular understanding of how humans have produced and consumed over the last few centuries. This information becomes authoritative. Many would argue that the way linguistics, as an example, has developed and the reasons we teach children this or that grammar is purely rational, a product of becoming more intelligent as a species. But Foucault says that the word rationalization is dangerous. He writes, what we have to do is analyze specific rationalities rather than always invoke the progress of rationalization in general. Specific rationalities, as if there are more than one. His point is that if there are innumerable different ways of doing something, as exemplified by the thousands of types of language and communication over the world, what justifies doing something one way over the other? His answer is power, that social systems move us to do certain things in certain ways. Between 1970 and 1982, Foucault gave a series of lectures at the Collège de France. One of the more influential in 1978 was Security, Territory and Population, which was published posthumously. In it, he takes biopower as the central concept. He said, "This year I would like to begin studying something that I have called, somewhat vaguely, biopower. By this I mean a number of phenomena that seem to me to be quite significant, namely, the set of mechanisms through which the basic biological features of the human species became the object of a political strategy, of a general strategy of power." He goes on to argue that our traditional understanding of power is a product of the Enlightenment. Starting in the 17th century, social contract.
So I'll pause there because I could watch it all day. But I'll go ahead and pause there just so that you can have a slight introduction to Foucault. And then I'll go back to my PowerPoint. So this is the basis of Carabine's methodology, is through Foucault. And so Carabine uses Foucault, this idea of power, knowledge, object, and creates an 11 steps, really trying to create some steps from this more broader way of thinking. And so Foucault did not create these steps. This is definitely the work of Jean Carabine. So we see here, oh, can you not see my screen? Are you able to see it? Sorry.
I think it was just not in presentation mode.
Oh, okay. Play
Yeah.
from current slide. Okay, cool. Sorry.
Yes.
So basically, discourse is a part of power and knowledge are a part of discourse. And so you can actually see how power and knowledge are played or are discovered or embedded in different discourse. And so we see that definitely when it comes to policies and how they're written. We see that there's power, there is knowledge written within those. Expectation of knowledge too. I think we can definitely challenge what that means. Who has knowledge, who doesn't have knowledge, what is knowledge, what kind of knowledge. So I just went ahead and grabbed some quotes from the reading that I thought were pretty important for us to kind of maybe talk about. If there's other quotes that you all were interested in, please feel free to like unmute yourself and we can have a conversation about that. But yeah, we'll kind of start from here. So Foucault's genealogical offers a lens through which to undertake discourse analysis. So the lens means discourses are on one hand infused with power and knowledge, and then the other as playing a role in producing power knowledge. So if we actually analyze a policy, we see that on one hand, it's infused with power knowledge, like it's infused with that. We can see that, we can pull that apart. And then on the other hand, it's playing a role in producing that power and that privilege. And so it's doing both things at the same time, which I think is fascinating. Discourse as the way that an issue or topic is spoken of. So again, we kind of talk about there's lots of discourses. It's not just the written word, which we can also challenge because I will say in Okun's idea of white supremacy, there is this idea that the written word, right, is absolutely like it. So if it's not written, it doesn't exist. And we know that that's super problematic and that is has an underpinnings of white supremacy. So I think we can even challenge discourse and who gets to have access to discourse and what that means too on another scale as being critical scholars. For Foucault, discourses are productive, the objects of which they speak, right? So if we think of a policy, so I'm thinking of this as a policy, if your institution is saying we value equity, we value racial justice, and they're saying that, but in their policies, they're saying something different, and students are experiencing things that are different, I think the discourses of those policies are very productive, right? They speak to the product of the objects in which, the product of the objects in which they speak, right? So that says more about the institutions and what they truly feel than what they're maybe saying, which could be performative. Discourses are also productive in that they have power outcomes or effects. Exactly, right? If we think of policies, they definitely have power outcomes or effects. And that's why they have so much power, because they carry a lot of weight. They carry the way in which we govern. They cover, the way in which things are supposed to happen. And so, yeah, I think they definitely carry a lot of power and weight. Discourse produces shortcut paths into ideas which convey messages about good or bad and acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Oh my gosh, we totally see this with policies, right? A policy is often made, right, because something has happened at an institution. Also, policies are made because of laws which are created, which are also have the underpinnings of white supremacy and do not focus or center the identities of marginalized people. And so if we are basing our policies off of laws, such as Title IX policies, which is after the Title IX law, these laws have not been inclusive or grounded in social justice principles. And so then that effect would then being that we would continue to create policies off of these laws that are also not focused on social justice. Discourses at one and the same time draw upon and sometimes transform existing knowledge and produce new knowledge and power effects. So I had to read this one like multiple times. So they sometimes will challenge existing knowledge. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's definitely why I'm into critical policy analysis, because I like to challenge current knowledge or what we think is true, what we think is acceptable, what we think is good. And it also produces new knowledge and power effects, right? And so we can also change the knowledge and we can change the effects that it has through analyzing policies in which we think and know are harmful. In his examination of the past, Foucault sought to trace the development of knowledges and their power effects in order to reveal something about the nature of power knowledge in modern society. So this is kind of talking about the genealogical portion. So again, Foucault was not necessarily interested in tracing back all of the history of a language, of a word. They were more concerned about the effects of what this could look like and the effects of this power in modern day society. So looking at what this word has done or how it's been used, absolutely. And then looking at what the effects could be or what the effects have been in modern society. So genealogical is concerned to map those strategies, relations, and practices of power in which knowledges are embedded and connected. So not your average way of thinking about genealogical. Usually genealogical means a lot of tracking and tracing of the past. And then normalization is brought up too by Dr. Carabine. The relationship between normalization and discourse is that discourse convey messages about what is the norm and what is not. In effect, they establish the norm, right? So we see a policy and we basically are saying it's not normal for maybe, I don't know, undocumented students to go to school because we don't have policies that actually support them. And so the policy in itself is creating the norm of what a student looks like. And so normalization is extremely important. And how do we disrupt and dismantle what is normal? I don't even like that word normal. And so how can we use this as a way to critique and disrupt those narratives? FGDA, which we know is Foucauldian genealogical discourse analysis, is a constant process of reassessing. And I think that this is really important, that all policies should be reassessed. So a lot of times people are like, well, we solved that problem, let's just move on to the next policy. But really, we should be doing a lot of assessment to make sure that the policy is being implemented the ways in which it was intended. And we need to be looking to see if there's not harm being done. There's a lot of unintended consequences that happen out of state, federal, institutional policies. And folks may not have went into those conversations or created that policy with harm, but it happens due to biases, white supremacy culture, power. And so that they need to be constantly reassessed, which can sometimes feel exhausting for folks. Like, we just looked at this policy. Yep, and we're going to have to keep looking at it because we have to acknowledge that the structures in which these all exist come from a very privileged, harmful white supremacy place. And then normalization is a means through which power is deployed. So again, going back to that normalization piece, and that's how power is deployed, is when we try to normalize and also say when something's good or bad. Yeah. See here. So this is one of the things that I want to leave you with. If you don't leave with anything else, I want to definitely leave you with this. And that is this quote that basically is so powerful. Although discourse may leave regulatory intentions, this does not mean that ultimately results are regulatory outcomes. Individuals are active agents and discourses are themselves in constant reconstruction and contention. So we are active agents to try to challenge discourse. We are active agents that should be demanding more and that policies can change. Laws can change. Interpretations should also be talked about, is because a lot of folks have different interpretations. The law is interpreted. Like there's a lot of interpretations of law. And so I think it's important for us to remember that just because something is said or is a policy, that doesn't mean that it's a forever law or that it's not, you can't contest it. It should be contested, it should be challenged, it should be reconstructed. And it is through analysis that in which that is one mode in which we can do it. Okay, so what does this mean? So through the reading, and I'm not sure if we can post that reading one more time, maybe in the chat, but through the reading, there's a really great summary of all of these concepts on page 280. I have 4 bullet points. There's a lot more there that I thought were really important for you to also take away. So this idea that power is operating and circulating at every level in society, like, yes, absolutely. We have to acknowledge that. It is in discourse that power and knowledge are joined together. And so I thought that was really important. We saw the discourse, power, and knowledge, little balls and a little ice cream. It looks like a little ice cream cone. Discourse have a normalizing role in regulatory outcomes. The idea that knowledge, truth, and discourse are all social constructs and historically specific. So we have to know that those are social constructs, that knowledge, truth, and discourse are social constructs. And so when people say, like, this is the lay of the law of the land, whatever, like, those are social constructs. And so those can be challenged and should be challenged. And then I love how Carabine really put all of this into operationalized what Foucault was thinking into 11 steps. I love that. And so here are the 11 steps. The first step is really talking about selecting your topic and really like collecting all of your data. And so, and then it really, I love how they give like what that looks like. There's lots of different ways to collect data. And then this next step is knowing your data. So making sure that you read your data, reread it, familiarize yourself with the data. Then you're going to identify themes. So you're going to take a look at categories. And what's really great about this article too is that there were some ways for you to actually like practice how to do these things. And so that's why I also thought it was a fantastic article. So you're going to identify themes, categories, objects of the discourse. What are they talking about? What are they really trying to say? Who are they naming but not really naming? And who has the policy? Who's the policy intended for? And what group of people? And who is it not intended for? Then it says number 4, look for evidence of an interrelationship between your discourse. So if you have one paper, you have, so you have the actual policy, maybe you have like a interview with someone that made the policy. What are some of the interrelationships of what was said and what was on the actual policy? Identify the discursive strategies and techniques that are employed. So you want to identify some of the strategies and techniques that you see that were happening. And again, in the article, Carabine has some like ways in which they did it for their study. Look at the absences and silences. Like that is like so important. That's where the criticalness comes out, is who is absent in this policy, who is silent in this policy, what groups of people are absent or silent. Look for resistances and counter discourse. So you also want to find folks that are against or for the policy, and you want to read what they're saying. So if you are very for a policy, you shouldn't always just be reading why this policy is great. You should also be taking a stab and taking a look at why people are having issues with this policy, and taking a look at that as well. And then identify the effects of the discourse. So what effects are because of these words? What does that mean for folks that this policy will actually be implemented? What are the effects of that? Is it that folks are reminded that they aren't valued at the institution? Is it that folks that have those identities feel like they're not welcomed at the institution? What are the effects of these words? What are the effects of these policies? And what does that mean for those communities? Number 9, you're gonna outline the background to the issue. Number 10, contextualize the materials and the power knowledge networks of the period. So I think also that's where that genealogical piece comes in of what is going on in the time. What is what's happening in that institution at the time? Is there a lot of contention? Is there new leadership? Those are all also really important factors. Where did this come from? Taking a look at that as well is also important to understand the power and knowledge networks of where this came from. And then being aware of the limitations of your research is just always important. Research does have limitations. You can't simply research every single thing that you're interested in. And you can't have, your one piece of research can't explain every single phenomenon that's happening related to something. So I think just acknowledging hey, I only had access to this amount of policies or this amount of knowledge, and I only maybe had this amount of time. And so things like that are just really important for us to understand our limitations. That's also just important for anyone that wants to go into research. We cannot and do not have the ability to just research every single thing and have outcomes to every single issue that comes up in your research. So, all right. So we're gonna practice. We're gonna practice using those 11 steps. And yeah, we're gonna split up into groups. And so I have pulled some really interesting policies that I have found. I thought some were really hitting close to home. So some are actually from institutions in Colorado. Others are just navigating, for instance, the national mandatory reporting policy. That's usually every institution has that. I'm actually in a research project right now trying to challenge mandatory reporting policy for sexual assault survivors. And then there's a policy from a faculty member about missing class grading that I definitely want you to take a look at. A working from home policy, I think, is on all of our minds. And then the required COVID-19 vaccination policy. Also, many of our institutions have required that, and would love to hear your thoughts about that. So what we're gonna do is I think that there's gonna be rooms that are open. Feel free to pick one. I'm gonna put in the chat, so I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna go ahead and put in the chat the links to the actual policy. Let's see here. My computer. And then also on this handout, I have some other, I mentioned a couple of other articles or things like that. So feel free to peruse that extra references that I've alluded to in this presentation. So there are the policies. 5 breakout groups. You're going to take a look at the policy and go through the 11 steps as much as you can. And remember, you're in charge here. You get to be as critical as you want to be, and you should be critical. And then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about what you found. Before you go, I do want to share a couple of things to be thinking about. So things to ponder while you're doing this is, so first of all, like these steps are not like, again, as a critical scholar, like there's going to be steps that are missing. And so I always think also challenging the tool that you're using is also really important. So challenge this tool. Maybe you don't like this tool. Maybe it's missing a step. Maybe there's a step that you think shouldn't be in there. So that's always important to be thinking about, is the actual tool you're using. How are your own privileges and biases showing up in your analysis? How are you like sitting in that discomfort? What's coming up for you? And then how can white supremacy, power, privilege be challenged in the policy that you're reviewing? Like how can that actually be challenged? And then what are the unintended and very much intended, even if they're harmful to underrepresented communities, oftentimes they're very much intended to be. What are the unintended and then the intended consequences of the policy? So be thinking of that in the back of your minds. I can definitely put this stuff in the chat while you're away. I'm going to be putting all of your names in the spinner, so when we come back, we can win some books, but excited for you all to try this. Yeah.